Hello, welcome to the Are You Highly Sensitive live webinars. This is recorded and live on June 15th, 2020. And my name is Elaine Friend. I'm an international consultant on high sensitivity. I coach, consult, and in California, where I'm licensed as a family therapist, I provide psychotherapy for highly sensitive people and parents who are working with sensitive people. So today's webinar is called Working with Trauma, Healing Past Trauma and Preventing Trauma Moving Forward. Healing the past and prevention of trauma are both part of the highly sensitive person's 5 to Thrive. I often talk about the first person we have to parent is ourselves and our brains. So we're going to apply the discussion of trauma in sensitive children to all of the kids in our lives. The child we were, the brain we get to live with now, and the young people we may be raising or raised in the past. So much parenting, and yet we have to do it. Did you know you were signing up for all this parenting? You probably weren't, but you were born with this trait. It's innate and it's part of you. It's a gift and it's also a challenge. As long as we are willing to take charge, we can work with trauma in all of these scenarios. This is not going to be therapy, but rather education and discussion. If you are currently experiencing or working with trauma in your own life, it is absolutely important that you have a qualified HSP-friendly mental health provider supporting you. We can get support in lots of places. Sometimes it's through religion, sometimes spirituality. And today I'm going to hopefully offer you some tools as well as some experience, strength, and hope about working with trauma. My idea was that we are in a really just expansive global trauma right now. The news is traumatic, and it is something that we need to shelter our little children inside of us and our actual children from right now, what's going on. Educate them about the important issues so they can use their deep processing, but at all costs, avoid allowing the children to experience the news. And also, we need to do our own parents. We need to really take care of ourselves so that we are not activated all the time when we're parenting. For that reason, I've invited my friend and colleague, Martha Williams, here to help us, because Martha has a beautiful tool that she shares in such a beautiful way. And we're going to experience a body scan. This is a tool that you can use for yourselves, and we're going to do it all right now so you can get yourselves comfortable. You're welcome to stay sitting or lay down. If you're at work, please just go ahead and go close the door. Let people know that you don't want to be disturbed for the next 10 to 15 minutes. That's all it's going to be. And if you have children, I'd like you to think about this tool as we're doing it as something that you could also share with them. So get comfortable, close your eyes, and allow yourself to experience this beautiful grounding exercise. I'll introduce Martha while you're getting yourself situated. You're welcome to stay sitting. It's totally fine to do so. Martha Williams has been engaged in the mystical world and wellness practices for close to 30 years and shares her passion for health, well-being, and dynamic spiritual connection through workshops, yoga classes, and shamanic healing. Trained as a clinical social worker, a certified yoga teacher, and a shamanic practitioner, Martha was part of the workshop programming team with the country's largest yoga and holistic health center, Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, for close to 10 years. She's currently part of the workshop programming team at 1440 Multiversity in Northern California, which is how I met her. And I've been knowing Martha for a number of years now, and always I benefit so much from her beautiful leadership in the world of healing. So if you are comfortable, you feel your feet on the ground, and you're ready to go, allow me to turn you over to Martha Williams.
And begin to deepen your breath. Inhale through the nose. Exhale out through the nose. Maybe those shoulders roll back a little bit. 2 more times. Take your time. Go at your own pace. Inhale through the nose. And exhale through the nose. Inhale through the nose. And exhale. Let your tongue rest softly on the base of the mouth, the floor of the mouth. And I'll start some ambient music, some nice wave music for us to listen to during the guided body scan. And again, with eyes closed or soft gaze at the floor in front of you, bring your attention inward to your mouth. Notice sensation in the mouth. Do you feel any pulsing or tingling in the tongue? Focusing on the roof of the mouth. Do you notice any pulsing or tingling in the roof of the mouth? Feeling inside left cheek. And inside right cheek. Feeling teeth and gums. Noticing teeth and gums. Do you feel any pulsing or tingling in the teeth and gums? Focusing on lips, feeling upper lip and lower lip. Noticing your breath. Follow breath as it flows in through the nose and then out through the nose. Traveling up the face, focusing on the eyes, noticing eyebrows, eyelids, feeling left eye and right eye. Feeling both eyes at once, resting in eye sockets. Focusing on ears. Imagine the folds of the ears, the earlobes. Follow sound as it travels in through ear canals. Follow sound in. Imagine it meets at a spot in the center of the head. From that place in the center of the head, imagine relaxation bubbling up like a spring, softening top of the head. Top of the head softens. Relaxation flows from the top of the head down over your forehead, softening forehead, softening eyebrows, and the space between the eyebrows. Relaxation flows over the eyelids and cheeks, softening mouth and jaw. Relaxation flows down the sides of the neck, front of the neck, softening back of the neck. Back of the neck softens. Relaxation flows into the shoulders, softening shoulders, and flows down the upper arms through the elbows and forearms to the wrists and hands. Feeling fingers, feeling the palms of your hands. Do you notice any pulsing or tingling in the palms of your hands? Traveling back up the arms through wrists and forearms, elbows and upper arms. Shoulders soften more deeply as relaxation flows over the chest, softening chest and ribs, softening abdomen and pelvis. Relaxation flows into the hips, softening hips and lower back. Follow relaxation as it flows through the thighs, knees, shins, and to your ankles. Feeling feet, feeling toes, feeling soles of the feet. Can you feel the soles of your feet? Begin to deepen your breath. Slow, steady breath in through the nose and out through the nose. Allow your eyes to flutter open, coming back into this room, back into this space you inhabit. Maybe roll the shoulders a bit again, wiggle your fingers, feeling into your body, noticing any difference.
Should we say that you don't have to sit up or open your eyes for the rest of the webinar? Thank you so much, Martha.
Pleasure.
I think it's so important that we can get grounded that way. And, I know you have a special gift for it. Your voice is so perfect, but also your energy. I can feel all the years of work that you've done. And thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
When you and I were talking via email about you coming on and doing this for our webinar, I was saying that I would like this to be a tool that we could all use for ourselves, but also for our children, those of us who are parenting, and other people in our families as well. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, how we might make use of this in our lives in many ways.
Well, I can't think of a better way to introduce children to optimal self-care, but also in an easy way that's both body friendly and friendly to our busy minds. I think it's really important for parents to model self-care in that way. And, you know, once parents are coming from a more relaxed place, even if you're still, you know, a little bit up that tree, coming down just a little bit can make all the difference in terms of being present with your children. And it's a great way maybe to send them off to sleep, whether you record it, you know, whether you record somebody else and you both listen to it together, or maybe you record your voice for your child or you walk them through it. And you can have fun with it. You can shorten it. You don't have to go as precisely through the scan as I do. You can shorten it, and you can sort of, you know, play with animal images. You know, imagine a butterfly, you know, flapping its wings on your cheeks or on the top of your head, or like really use imagery like, you know, imagine there's a pool of water on the top of your head, and then it flows down, washing away any tension and tightness, you know, using words they can relate to: tightness, stiffness in the body. It's off the top of my head.
I love that. Thank you so much. I mean, actually, when I was a kid, my mom told me to do sort of progressive relaxation. She taught me in her highly sensitive wisdom to say, you know, relax toes, relax feet, relax ankles, to help me calm down, because it was always hard for me to unwind. At the end of the day, you know, family dinner, you know, it's just part of this big summit with Health, Love, and Family on family meals. And I addressed highly sensitive kids in the summit. And I said, you know, maybe the best thing is don't make them do it. But because it's overstimulating, especially after being at school all day, you know, with other people. And so I had a hard time unwinding. And I know I hear from parents all the time in this community and among my clients that it's very, very challenging for a lot of sensitive children and adults to unwind and go to sleep at night.
Yeah, and you said something, Elaine, about relax your fingers and toes or something like that. If it's hard for a child to grasp, you know, this idea of releasing and relaxing, do the opposite. So you can have them contract their hands, you know, and then release, and contract their toes, curl the toes and the feet, and release. And then you invite them to stay in that released place.
I love that. But the body scan is it's not really so much trying to relax something. That's one of the things I love about it. It's mindfulness, really, right? It's just being aware and bringing you into your body. And I think we can get so spinning in our heads, ruminating, the hamster wheel, whatever you want to call it. We can really get caught up in our brains. We HSPs who process things so terribly deeply.
Absolutely. And some people lead a body scan. They don't use the word relax or release, because for just that reason, it you know, sometimes puts pressure. People feel pressure about, I got to release my shoulders, you know. Simply breathing and noticing and focusing on the parts of the body can be deeply relaxing without the intention of relaxing. I must do this to relax, or I must relax my body.
Yeah. Well, I really, one of the reasons I thought of you for this webinar is, you know, trauma is such an activating topic, and we're living it just everywhere right now. And I'm a big fan of, you know, laying down in bed with your child, or snuggling in the rocker in the living room before your child goes to bed. And I don't care what age, whether we're talking 6 months or 16 or 26, it's okay. They need to have, you know, that heart, that body connection. If our bodies are regulated, they can regulate from our own bodies. We can share our groundedness, our regulation and I work with some couples, and it's very clear that one of the members of the couple can use the other partner's body to become more regulated. So I'll just add, I think it's so important that if we can do this for ourselves more frequently, so that when we show up with our children, then we are more regulated and we're able to do it for them. So you could make a recording, but you could also just really lead them through it. After a while, even a 5-year-old can learn to do this for themselves. That just check in. Oh, thank you, Martha.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. Do you have anything else you want to say before I know you're off to another meeting?
I don't think I do.
Okay.
I don't think I did. Well, I'll give a couple of props to Jennifer Reese, who I first learned the guided body scan from in her classes at the Kripalu Center. She would teach a gentle yoga class. I would go to it just for her guided body scan at the end. So honoring and appreciating her, and also Robert Rand. He created the soundtrack. It's called Wave Pool, and I just love it. Between the synthesizer, and that's a true recording of the waves crashing here in Maine.
And Martha, if people want, are you open to people reaching out to you for a session? Are you working with people remotely?
Absolutely. That's really the only way I can be working with people right now is a remote session, whether it's yoga or guided body scan or shamanic healing, energy healing. And I've been finding that these remote sessions have been really deep and very powerful.
I know. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
It kind of makes me get over my oh, it's the screen, it's terrible thing, because it's so deep.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Laura can find Soulfire Associates. Remind us your website for Laura.
That's exactly it. Soulfireassociates.com, or if you just search Martha Williams Kama Yoga or Martha Williams Shamanic Healing Maine. It should pop up.
Yeah, that helps, right? Being in Maine. Kind of like where I am too. Thank you so much, my dear. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. All right, be well.
Bye. So you all can look for Martha, and Martha, I'm going to help you here. There you go. And seek her out for more of that. If Martha's energy, I'm going to give you a little lesson in finding the people that help you the most. If Martha's energy, her work, her way of leading the body scan is really grounding and soothing to you, then I would highly recommend you seek her out for some extra support. That's going to be one of the main themes of today, which is finding your faculty, those folks who can really help you do better, feel better, and live better. We have a lot of great questions today, and Laura has encouraged you through the screen at the beginning and also in the chat. It's that many of you have read all the questions and scenarios, and I just want to start out with some gratitude for such great content. As always, I've been thinking that one of these days I should make a book of all of your questions, because it's writing from highly sensitive people. It's beautiful. And, and it's also, I just got a little chill because it also speaks to the challenges of the way we live our lives and how we must live our lives. So I'm going to start out today with a little bit of a slideshow to just bring us all to a similar level of understanding. And I didn't think we would be living this experience when I made this idea for our parenting webinar. But I'll remind you all, many of you have seen my leaf photograph. This leaf fell in my driveway at the beginning of the pandemic. And I thought it was so beautiful. And it looks like a heart to me. But it's not perfect. It's bruised and tattered, and it has a lot of dimension to it. So I brought this slide up just to show you that leaf. It's so important to me, the way it looks. And I think our hearts are all a little tattered right now, but still so beautiful. So we're talking today about sensory processing sensitivity. I want to remind you that that's the scientific name for our trait. It's innate. We're born with this. That's how you know if someone has the trait or not. It didn't come on at age 7. And for someone who's experiencing a lot of trauma, you might wonder if their trauma is related to sensitivity or not. We'll dig into that a little bit more, but overstimulation is a symptom that can be from trauma, but it also can just be from having this trait. These, I put reactive brain or highly reactive brain and finely tuned nervous system in here to just remind you that those are other things that we can use to describe our trait and ourselves when we're talking to people. And sometimes we do need to let people know that we are highly sensitive. These are different ways to do it. I think it's really important also to tell people that it's 20% of over 100 species. Why? Why do we have such a huge percentage? It's too many to be a disorder. It's more like left-handed or right-handed. It's decidedly a minority, but it's a category. And you either have the trait or you don't. If you feel like you have the trait, that's good enough for me. But it's not like a little sensitive or manage your sensitivity. No, if you have the trait sensory processing sensitivity, you are a highly sensitive person. Why do we have to have this? It's so annoying to me. No, it's so wonderful to me. It is both. And the reason is that we need a small percentage, but a significant number of each species that will be slower to act or react, that will process things more deeply before they make decisions. This is a survival strategy that, and we think the errands are now thinking that it's probably in every species. The research just keeps rolling in. I wanted to introduce the concept of trauma and working with trauma in highly sensitive children through our identifying acronym DOES, depth of processing. You know, part of it is that we think about things so much. And so you don't just kind of pass over. Somebody asks a question about little t trauma and big T trauma, and I like to think about that a lot, actually. And little t traumas are the kind of the everyday things that can be traumatic to some people. Now, if you just think about humanity in general, who would you say is the most sensitive member, or are the most sensitive members of humanity? The most sort of delicate, sensitive, their sensitivity causes them to communicate clearly to get their needs met. I'm thinking here about infants and maybe even up to toddlers, the babies of humanity. They are so acutely sensitive, even those who don't have the trait. And a lot of them are way more easygoing than the more sensitive and intense babies. But for all of them, little things can be trauma. So, and as we talk about this for parents, you are doing an awesome job. I know you are, because you're highly sensitive and you're so thoughtful. You're processing deeply your parenting. So I don't want you to take this information I'm giving to be self-critical. It doesn't serve anything. And your children are getting way more parenting than most children do. So I want you to be really kind with yourselves as I say these things. And a baby will experience their primary caretaker being, say, 20% less available as traumatic. Wow. So postpartum depression or a health issue or grieving, those kinds of things would make a mother who is profoundly available, 20% less available, anyone it would make. And I'm sorry I said mother, not necessarily a mother, whoever the primary parent is. If that person is 20% less available, those very, very sensitive little babies, even the ones who don't have the trait, will experience that as trauma. That's a little t trauma, but it can become big T, and it's more likely to become a big T trauma, which we would think of more as, say, a car wreck or, you know, the stuff that's going on in the world right now, the brutality, abuse, war, all of those things, being violated in some way, those are big T traumas. But for somebody who is so sensitive, be it a baby or a person with this trait, we can consider that little t traumas can become big T traumas. And that's what I really want to address today. And the reason is because we think about them so deeply. We process them so deeply. we are easily overstimulated. And the reason is because of all that deep processing and because of E, because we're so emotionally reactive. And I've been saying this a lot lately because someone said to me, oh, I really wish you wouldn't use that word reactive, a highly reactive brain, emotionally reactive. And it's true that many of the SPS, sensory processing sensitivity researchers and teachers are now saying emotionally responsive. And it is true. But the reactivity is part of how our brain works. I don't want us to shy away from it. It comes from that deep empathy as well. So if you're thinking things through so deeply, you're processing things so deeply, and you're having strong emotional reactions, of course you're going to be over aroused and overstimulated by it. I'm going to leave empathy aside for a moment, just with the cautionary tale that I say in every webinar. I think that we must always apply empathy to ourselves first. Highly sensitive people, you're not the ones going out there with no empathy toward the world. You're the ones going out there with empathy to the world that may cause you not to pay attention to the DOES for yourself. You're noticing every little thing, sensitivity to subtle stimuli. I mentioned about differential susceptibility in my introduction email, and I wanted to bring this slide up again. This was an initial, he redid this in 2011, but I think as early as 1995, W. Thomas Boyce, who's researching child behavior, found that a stressor in a child's life would have almost no impact on them if they did not have a highly reactive brain. So you can see on this slide that the darker purple, the bluish purple, is people who have a low reactive brain. And Tom Boyce has agreed with Elaine Aron that we're basically talking about the same people. He calls these children, after the Swedish terms, dandelion, as I do too on my website, elainefriend.com, if you want to read a little bit more about it. So that dark purple line, see how it's pretty flat? That is the stressor in the family, a family stressor that would impact a child. And the level of negative impact, and in Tom Boyce's research, he mostly looked at, he's a pediatrician, so he looked a lot at illness and injury. So we could say this, but it could also be mental illness, as I put on the left side there. But a dandelion or a child with a low reactive brain will have very little increase in negative impact from family stress. But then we go to us, that magenta or fuchsia, whatever color you see there, the brighter pink color, that line shows the orchid children, the highly sensitive children. When there's a stressor, such as a trauma or family conflict or any of those stressors or the news, which is a huge stressor right now, we orchid children are going to be way more severely impacted if the stress is high. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, I think you can see my cursor. Right here it says high. When the stress is high, all the way to the right, then the level of increased trauma, injury, illness, mental illness, all of these things are much higher for sensitive children, those with a highly reactive brain. The important thing, and this is why you're here today, I hope, this is why I do my work, this is it. This is everything of why I do my work. This left side, when stress is low in a sensitive child's life or a reactive child's life, they have way lower. This may not look like a huge amount to you, but it's very statistically significant. It's almost as much lower as the high is higher. You see that? Way, way lower of a more illness, injury. We have way less injury, illness, mental illness, and even impact from trauma when we lower the stress in these children's lives. Wow. This is profound, you all. And this is why we're here today. I'm going to stop the share. We have a lot of questions, and I'm going to be very cautious of time. I'd like you, if you haven't read the questions yet, to just take a moment to let me answer some before you put live questions in, because I feel like I almost should read all the questions aloud and then start talking, because there's so much shared experience. And that's why I want you to read it, so you see the shared experience. I'm just going to take a moment, maybe a drink. I encourage you to take a drink of water. If you're upright, if you're resting, stay resting. I want to remind you, I'm doing my mindful drink where I feel the glass on my lips. I feel the liquid in my mouth. And then I notice it going all the way down, and I slow it down a little bit. And it's a great way to live mindfully. If you do this, you can, every first time you pick up something to drink. Have you ever drank something that's like sweet or whatever it is that your thing you guzzle? Maybe you don't, highly sensitive people, but I do. I always guzzle anything that has to do with sugar or like juice or something. I don't do it a lot, so it's so exciting to my senses, and I'm completely unaware when it's gone. And I'm bummed that I wasn't mindful and aware of that lovely taste. So if you train yourself that the first time you take a sip of any liquid, that you will pay attention to it, it will stop your process in your brain. It's so helpful. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a childhood trauma that I experienced. I mentioned in my letter that I have had PTSD. I had a huge big T trauma. I'm not going to tell you about it because it's so activating for you to have to hear it, and I don't want to do that to you. It was in 1996. So I appreciate your empathy, and I want you to know I'm doing great. But when traumatic things are happening in my life, that stuff gets activated, as many of you have said. And it's so critical to me that I do a better job, as good a job as I possibly can, of preparing my body and myself for those experiences. There goes the pen. I'm changing my hips angle to make myself keep my hips moving. My chiropractor got after me about that because all this sitting in front of the computer. In January of 2018, I had a total knee replacement in one of my knees. I'm young for it, but they told me to do it 10 years before I did. And I was afraid, and I didn't want to do it. And I really didn't want to do it twice. So I thought I'll wait as long as possible. And it was a really hard experience for me. Turns out that, how old was I then? 53, just barely 53 is not a good time to get your knee replaced. It's better if you can wait longer, because maybe not if your knees are so bad, but I was too active. And so I kind of messed it up. And I had a really hard time healing. I was just absolutely miserable for months, really. And I still can't say whether it was the right thing for me to do, but I can't take it back. And it did make me start exercising a lot more. So now all of you probably know I ride a bike for exercise. I barely know how to ride a bike because I grew up on a ranch on a country highway in Oklahoma. And they taught me when I was 4 or 5, and then I pretty much didn't ride a bike again until I was a teenager. So I don't have it in my body the way normal kids do. So, but I've exercised a lot since then. And when I ride the bike, one knee hurts one way and the other knee hurts the other way, but somehow I can do it. And I never thought I could. So, that's the silver lining. Well, while I was laying in a lift chair in my living room in pain and miserable, part of my problem was I'm highly sensitive, so I couldn't use the pain meds. This is a great thing to call me for a consultation session for. If you are leaning toward major surgery and you're highly sensitive, I learned a lot. And so I gotta say, I just had some serious issues with it, and I experienced it as traumatic. I didn't quite know what was wrong, and I had a healing session, and the healer said, I feel like there's something that happened to you when you were a child that's related to this. And it's more complex than that, but through the process of our conversation, I remembered my left arm. When I was 7 years old, my pony Smokey, I was doing a trick on him, and he got scared, and he probably bucked, and I fell off underneath him, and he stepped on my arm. And it broke. If I can't get the right camera angle, or I would show you the scar that I still have. Um, the bone didn't come through the skin or anything gross like that, but it was pretty misshapen. And my parents weren't home. Trauma number one. I was with a babysitter and she did as well as she could, but my parents were hard to reach. And so I didn't have them to support me at the time. I had Carla, the babysitter, freaking out. And she called her mom. There were only, between us and town in that 5 miles, there were only three houses, three farms. And one of them was my dad's partner, another doctor. So Dr. Tuck came over and helped me. Got me to the ER where my parents met me. So I was really, really terrified. And I was angry. I was a spunky little brat. And I was so mad. I'm not going to be able to ride all summer. I'm not going to be able to have any fun this summer's right at the beginning of summer because it was clear by the shape of my arm that was broken. My dad was there. I got splinted. It was terrifically painful. They made me go to Tulsa, which was a 45-minute drive away from our small town in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. And that whole night was really hard. But the trauma came 3 or 4 months later. Because of the kind of child I was, a high sensation seeker, I didn't keep my arm still. I did everything I wasn't supposed to do, and I had to have surgery on the arm. So this is a great example of trauma for a sensitive child, elective surgery. I think things went okay, even though it was a really, really hard night. That night I broke my arm. Tons of pain, a little dissociation though, that really helps. But I feel like they were there. My parents were mostly there supporting me. When I had the surgery, it was, I'm going to say 1971 or something. There were so many aspects to being in the hospital that time that were hard for me. And I had a couple other hospital experiences, tonsils out, those kinds of things they did to children. I have some pre-verbal medical experiences too that make me afraid of medical procedures. But I had to wear a gown. I had to wear undies that were unfamiliar to me. And I hadn't thought of any of these things before my knee surgery. And then my parents had to stay in a hotel. They weren't allowed to stay in the hospital with me. And so I was alone overnight in the hospital after the surgery. And that morning, the doctor came in to check my stitches. And I had been in pain all night. I'm sure I was on medication. They tied your thumb to an IV stand like this so that the arm stayed elevated so I couldn't move. It was really, really hard. And the big thing was when the doctor came in, he pulled the cast had a little window right here over the stitches where they rebroke the arm and straightened it. And he pulled the gauze out and started picking at the stitches with tweezers. And it hurt. And I whimpered, maybe even cried a little. And he said, "You need to be a big girl. This is not a big deal," or something like that. I don't remember exactly what he said. So I'm giving you this story as an example of something that I never in my life thought is traumatic. I even wrote a children's book about it. It was an exciting adventure in my life. But when I had my knee surgery and I was really debilitated and scared about the pain just a couple of years ago, that experience came up in me. And really, it was traumatic for a highly sensitive child, and I did not process it. Nobody helped me process it. And I think I probably told my parents, and my mom was probably very sympathetic. And at the same time, there was this culture that I saw in somebody's question that you should just kind of toughen up and deal. And so where does that leave me now in all of you? Where it leaves us is this need to reframe and reparent ourselves. The highly sensitive person's 5 to Thrive that Elaine Aaron wrote is that, and we recently as a group renamed, the 5 to Thrive say that we must reframe our childhood and heal from past trauma. Many, many highly sensitive people have experienced things in their past that were extremely traumatic, and they're being activated right now, and other things can activate. I use my story of my surgeries to keep us out of the current discussion of trauma, because I don't want to activate us too much. So I told that story because I wanted to show you how it can happen, that it wasn't processed so well. And how do we do that now? And how do we do that for our children? I made a little video for you, and the dogs next door are barking the whole time, so I didn't share it. But I was talking a little bit about how when we have an experience, we all have different temperaments. I've talked to you about this. We have 9 temperaments. Most psychological researchers would describe 9 temperaments. And we're all different. And the thing is that when you experience something, and sensitivity is one of them, it's a little different than the trait sensory processing sensitivity, but it is sensitivity to your environment. When you experience something as scary or painful, and the adults around you say, "You're gonna be fine." I always give this example of my son who, as a sensitive young man, hated high school, much of it. He had a lot of great times too, but his temperament is more melancholic, not so chipper, not so happy. And I told you this before, like his favorite book in middle school was Of Mice and Men. And he just loves that darker view on the world. And I would say, high school's wonderful. What are you talking about? You're on the mountain biking team and you're in the rock band. I mean, you go to a private school, they pretty much pay your tuition. It's a beautiful thing, your school experience. And what that does to a child is it makes them, or an adult, it makes them feel unseen, like you don't understand. So the correct response to that is, oh, it's so hard. Junior year especially sucks. That kind of thing, to really see people. A child skins their knee and you want to cheer them up. Most adults want to go to the child and cheer them up or tickle them and make them laugh or whatever. And what a child needs, especially a sensitive child, to keep that from becoming trauma is to say, oh yeah, thank you, Anna. Let's 9 temperaments. Definitely, I'll go dig into those deeply with everybody either in July or August. Laura, will you make a note of that? Because I won't remember after. So the skin knee. This is another one of my childhood traumas. I don't think anybody even was aware, so I didn't make it into a trauma in my own life. There's one. I was riding my tricycle in my driveway. This was before we moved out to the farm. My dad was in med school, and the driveway in our little house in Del City, Oklahoma was, well, it feels in my mind like it was this steep, but it was probably this steep. And I was riding my tricycle and I tipped over and I skinned my knee. I still have the scar today. I won't gross you out by showing you. And I skinned it up really badly. And I was probably sitting in the driveway crying for a while before anybody even knew I was there, because I think I was probably almost 4 and my mom was inside with the baby. And we lived in in a much earlier time in a small community, the neighbors across the street, your children could play in the street. It was no biggie. And so no one said anything to me for a long time. And then, I think this is one of the reasons that I can function today as my sensitive mom. And because I imagine what she did was she came out and she said, "Oh my goodness, that must hurt so much. I bet you feel really worried and afraid." Mirroring my experience is so helpful. And that's how you just let that be a skin knee and not trauma. If we don't honor and mirror the experience of the trauma, then we get it trapped in our bodies. And there's great books. Oh, I brought them. Maybe I'll give you guys a writing assignment in a minute and go get them. I was going to show them to you. There are fabulous books on how to work with trauma in children. I'm not going to go into all the details of it. I'm going to keep it in a more theoretical perspective. But if you're raising children or you want to reframe your own childhood with regard to your own childhood trauma, I really recommend my 2 favorite ones. I love the chat. I'm going to start reading questions now that I've talked a little bit about my own life. I wanted to do one more sort of disclaimer, which is that my child as well has experienced quite a bit of trauma. I've told you before that he had a severe heart condition as a baby and lived with it until he had a major surgery for it when he was 11 and a half. And then it went away. And then when he was 17, it came back. And we've worked with it throughout his entire childhood. He had then another disease when he was almost 6 that was life-threatening. And so, now he's, in emergency medicine and probably will go to medical school and become a trauma doctor. That's what he thinks now. I always thought he'd be a cardiologist since he has so many relationships with cardiologists because both illnesses were related to cardiology. So we've been living this and working it on the front lines, my own traumas and my son's traumas. So let's get into your stories a little bit. I'm going to read two at a time, I think, at least for these first two. They're kind of long, and I would like you to make notes as you hear them about what you think and how you relate to these women. I think these are both women. I'm an adult woman in inquiry about how to understand my own childhood experience. I've heard suggestions that growing up as a highly sensitive person and not being recognized or legitimized as highly sensitive can be traumatic. Probably heard that from me. As trauma is in a wider current conversation today, including distinction between developmental trauma, like trauma over a period of time, and instance trauma, one moment of traumatic experience, what are your thoughts about growing up as an HSP in a family that did not know or understand high sensitivity and whose motto was, children should be seen and not heard? Did I tell you my family's motto was, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Children should be seen and not heard. And the children were told not to cry because it made the parent look bad or was difficult for the parent to deal with. Thus, the injury was not being seen or heard, not valued. It wasn't until much later in life that I understood that I was highly sensitive. Is this considered traumatic? What are suggestions for repairing trauma? I'm going to give you guys a moment just to process, you all. I don't want to be sexist, sorry. I'm going to give everyone a moment to process this a little bit. Children should be seen and not heard. And don't cry. Tuck it in. Toughen up. I'll give you something to cry about. That was the Okie accent. Okay, I'm going to read you the second one. I'm a middle-aged woman and only recently became aware that I suffered from childhood emotional neglect, especially on behalf of my mother, in a family where the language of feelings wasn't practiced. This was a terribly damaging experience with extremely negative effects on my adult life, and at times it continues to be so. I know, doggone it. Let me just say this to everyone listening, be you live or on the recording later. This stuff does not go away. You just become more skilled at working with it. It doesn't go away. I'm really sorry. It makes you a deeper, stronger person. And I don't mean just like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, although there is a little bit of that to it. But it's something that will stay with us forever when we've experienced trauma. Okay. This is the same person. The path to recovery has been long, difficult, and very painful. Knowing that highly sensitive children don't do so well in negative environments, could you offer some specific, effective help to us adults on how to repair the damage this caused? I know there are books out there to help, but somehow that emptiness and sadness inside doesn't seem to leave. So please take a moment to process this story. Maybe make some notes. Okay, so I want to thank Sylvia for putting a question in the Q&A because it's just what I was about to say. How do we reparent ourselves as adults? And do I do I have any books to recommend for reparenting traumatized HSP adults? I don't really right now have book recommendations. If folks have book recommendations, I invite you to put them in the chat. How do we heal my mother wound as my mother wasn't emotionally available to me? Okay, so Laura, I think you can mark all those as answered because I'm going to talk about that right now. There is, critical that we take our childhoods and reframe them. And let me look at the time. It's a big topic, isn't it, you all? It's really important that you have therapy. And somebody's asked what's the best therapeutic treatment, and people love EMDR and brain spotting and cognitive behavioral therapy, these things that are like specific tools. And for HSPs, I want to say that it's not enough. It's really important to have the tools. I give you tools all the time because I'm a big believer in tools. And it's really important that you allow yourselves to have some depth work. Psychodynamic, humanist, Jungian. I think it's very, very important to have some time to process what happened. And the reason I recommend a therapist is because we need a safe container for doing this work. If you have trauma, both of you do here, yes, in these questions. If you have trauma, it's critical that you have a safe place to process it, okay? So if you've been to my workshops before, you know I do this whole piece about honoring that child within you. And I'm going to give you a moment right now to imagine that wounded, sensitive child. And if you have a child, I think it would be very important for you to also do this later with your own child. But what I'd like you to think of is, can you think of like a 4-year-old child? Let's think of me, 4-year-old little Lainey falling over on her tricycle and skinning her knee to kingdom come. How would you treat that child? Well, if you were there watching that happening, now that you know that it's not particularly helpful to say, oh, you're going to be okay, it's just a skin knee, right? You wouldn't do that now. You know that that's not what's helpful. What does that little kid need? She needs you to pull her into your lap, if she's available for that. Or maybe just to get down to her level. So go ahead and close your eyes and imagine this for just a moment. Let's take care of 4-year-old me, and then we'll take care of 4-year-old you. Because, remember I talked about empathy? It's a lot easier to do it for others than it is for ourselves. Darn it. It makes me so mad sometimes. So imagine that little me there. I was pretty cute, but I pretty much stuck my tongue out in almost every picture. So what you're going to do is close your eyes and imagine going up to me on the driveway. And, maybe you'll lift the tricycle off of me because I'm all trapped underneath it. And sit down next to me. Put a hand on me, on that little girl. And mirror back her experience and her feelings. You know how you blow a kiss on an owie? That's a beautiful thing. And after the sort of screaming hysterics of the pain, if that's going on, has stopped or wound down a little bit, maybe you pull me in your lap and hold me close and murmur things to me about how scary it was and how much your knee hurts. Okay, now I want you to shift with your eyes closed and picture yourself. And if you're parenting little kids right now, it's really important that you work on yourself on this first. So picture yourself as that little kid that's scared. Most of these things happened, many of these things happened to us before we can remember, pre-verbal. Most of us don't remember a whole lot before 5. But I bet you've seen a picture, most of you have seen a picture of yourself at 2, 3, and 4. Imagine that little kid feeling so scared or worried or injured. You can probably still feel them inside you right now. Pull them into your lap. Maybe you could cradle them if they're small enough. I used to cradle my kid even when he was 10, when he was scared or traumatized, and say, oh, my sweet little baby, my little boo endearment can you give that little one? Maybe their head is right here above your heart, with their ear turned sideways. And you can, and the little girl or little boy, you can feel and hear the adult you's heart beating. Maybe you'll stroke their hair a little. Maybe take your fingers down over from the forehead down over their eyelids and nose a few times to soothe them. Can you feel your chest softening and your heart opening with love for that little one? You are that child's mother or father. You're the parent. And she lives inside your brain. She's always there with you. So you can keep your eyes closed right now and do this in your head, or if you have a pen and paper, I'm going to ask you for just a moment to write a very brief note to this little person. If you had a nickname as a child, I didn't have a nickname. My nickname now is Lainey, but I give my child that nickname. In my children's books, the little girl's name is Annie because my middle name is Anne. So if you want to give a nickname, you can. When I give an example of this, I often call her Susie Q, the unknown child. But that's Oklahoma for you. 2 names for every child. So I'd like you to just write a little note to that child. And I'd like you to reassure him or her that you are here and that you love them and that you see the pain. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to get this note started, and you can finish it afterwards. I'm going to turn my camera off and get my trauma books while you write. Okay. You might be crying. That's good. It's okay if you're not, but if you are, I just want to acknowledge that it's always good. It's emotional leadership. So I saw somewhere in the chat while you were working that someone said that talk therapy isn't necessarily recommended for trauma. I disagree. For highly sensitive people. Not that it's the only thing you need, because trauma does get trapped in our bodies. That's what I'm talking about here, is that we need to be able to not let the trauma get stuck in our bodies. But we must reframe our childhood. And a skilled therapist is a really great way to do it. I have my notes here. I have my 3 M's: meditate, move, and mantra. And for sure, we do need to move trauma through our bodies. And there's a whole huge study on that. And I recommend doing a ton of that kind of stuff. I brought the books. I was going to take a picture of them, both Levine books. There we go. Trauma Through a Child's Eyes. See, it's the Levine, Peter Levine. And Trauma Proofing Your Kids, also Peter Levine. So these are just really good overviews of what trauma is and lots of great suggestions. To me, I think the most important thing that we can do is to treat our inner child. And I love Trauma Proofing Your Kids, but just to really be present with the children. So growing up in a family where children should be seen and not heard, is that considered trauma? It may have been for you. Certainly it's a loss, right? And we have to grieve. And this is why I often cry when I do the work of reframing my childhood that I just gave you, is that it's really, I feel so sad for all of your childhoods. You know, our society is built by and for the 80%. And so our families are, for the most part, not well structured. If we all grew up a few generations ago, why didn't we really know that much about high sensitivity at that time? Well, the world was much more compatible with sensitivity. And, you know, we lived in, not everybody did. People have lived for many generations in really busy, loud urban environments. And so I don't mean to oversimplify it. But in general, a slower life is good for a sensitive child. And definitely our life is not slow now. So I think that looking at books on children and trauma and looking at Peter Levine's work is a very good way to help you with reframing your childhood. You have to read these children's books, thinking of you as a child and as a child in mind. So these are my main things that I would suggest for repairing some of that. There's one more place. My son's always telling me I seem so religious, and I am not religious at all. I'm very spiritual, and I believe that religion teaches us many important tools. So here I go with a religious thing. Forgiveness is absolutely critical. So that's another piece that we do in our retreats, is work on really understanding our parents and their upbringing and what their experiences were, and working on understanding that they have whatever they have that they've been dealing with, and that they did what they could do, the best that they could do. And that's another great thing to do in therapy. And maybe one day we'll get to do retreats again, and we'll do it there too. I'm going to keep moving. Back to we'll get to the children in a second. Okay, I'm going to read you a couple more. Thank you. What are some of the most common childhood traumas for highly sensitive children? How can parents, whether they're sensitive or not, help prepare their children for these things so they are less traumatic? What are important things to do, say, when we become aware that traumas have happened? Okay, so I'm all about trauma prevention. I think you get the idea so far. When something, the bully, the owie, those kinds of things happen, we just process them in the moment with the child. And it's really important to share your body with them in some way. Hold their hands, hold them. Let yourself not be activated by what you think is their trauma. Children are profoundly resilient. And sensitive children, I think, are actually even more resilient if we are there supporting them. So I think I've covered this. When you become aware that traumas have happened, it's critical to discuss them at the level that the child wants to, but mostly to react them. When I had PTSD, it was at work, and so I had to avoid that workplace for a long time. But then it was important for me to go back and let some of that move through me. Okay. Why are childhood non-secure attachment traumas so difficult to heal, even after undergoing years of therapy and processing the pain? They continue to be activated for me in frequent life situations where I feel paralyzed. Is it just because I'm HSP or because therapists weren't trained on trauma and they weren't HSP themselves? Okay, you guys, here I go again with you guys because I'm activated. You all, these things that have happened to us, these traumas, will always be there, as I said before. We have to do a ton of work on ourselves to survive as HSPs in this world. And I mean, I have to get back to the news for children too, because I find the news so traumatic right now. So you may continue to feel activated, but I'll bet you this. Let me challenge each of you today, everyone who's hearing this now or later. When you are getting enough sleep, you're eating a really healthy balance, you're balanced nutritional life, diet. I hate to use the word diet, but you know what I mean. You're eating well, things that agree with you, enough protein, a smaller amount of caffeine and sugar and alcohol. When you're doing things that make your body a temple, when you treat your body as a temple, what else is there? Exercise is absolutely critical. Moving, moving, moving. And then if you have a trauma history, like a lot of people wrote here, it's so important that you take meditation seriously. I just gave a client yesterday a strict assignment, 1 hour a day. It can be split up into 3 20-minute segments or 2 30-minute segments, but 1 hour a day, meditate, yoga, or Qigong. I kind of see yoga and Qigong as moving meditation. It's absolutely, if you did that, if you exercised an hour a day, you breathe, you do breathing, conscious breathing and meditating for an hour a day, you eat right, and you get enough sleep, you do what it takes to unwind at night, you will be so much less activated. You know why I know? Well, a few decades of mental health helps, but really it's from my own personal experience. I'm sharing with you my own experience, strength, and hope, that when I take care of myself, I really don't get as activated. I get angry, I get upset, I feel a shot of adrenaline when things get activated, but it is not debilitating. And I've done a lot of treatment of all the different kinds that people are listing in the chat. Keep listing them. It's very good. And whenever you're in an HSP community, remember that you are a discriminating consumer and you take what you like and leave the rest. But there's a lot of resources here in this community, so please do keep putting them in the chat. Okay, attachment traumas are so difficult to heal. You know, you process them really deeply. And so when we end up with an insecure attachment style, which I think is pretty common with sensitive children, every time they came and went and you didn't really know if your caregivers were going to be solid for you, you processed it deeply. If you weren't sensitive, you wouldn't have even noticed as much. So it's very important work to work on attachment styles. And there's a lot of great stuff in Elaine Aron's books about helping yourself do that. I especially think the Highly Sensitive Person in Love is a very helpful workbook for this. And also the Highly Sensitive Person's workbook. So it's not just because you're highly sensitive, but being sensitive means that you're more profoundly impacted by it. Having poor attachment, or your caregivers not being 100% or at least 80% available to you, it gets you onto that pink line where you might, we're on the pink line anyway, but it gets you higher up on it where you might have a more negative impact from that experience. The good news about differential susceptibility, this is so important. Everything you do now, whether it's somatic therapy or the meditation, moving, my favorite mantra, I do TM, so I use a mantra with TM, but when I'm really stressed, I use the Serenity Creed as a mantra. If you're religious and you have a prayer or a guided meditation that you can do that is like metta, those kinds of things, loving kindness meditation, those kinds of things are extremely helpful for moving through. See, all these questions are pretty much the same. What are good tips for moving out of automatic and out of control nervous system responses after we've been triggered and reminded of a serious trauma? I was the victim of a random violent crime at my home and find unexpected triggers years later. My nervous system will go crazy and it's hard to settle it back down. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard to settle back down once your nervous system gets activated like that. So you have to, if you have trauma, significant trauma in your life, you feel traumatized, it's absolutely critical that you treat yourself exceptionally. And it's hard to do. God, I forget all the time. I have so many tools that I use. I like the 5-minute journal. Is that what it's called? Laura, will you look on the internet? Is it called the 5-minute journal? I think it is. Where just every morning you write down a few things about what your intentions are for the day and something that you're grateful for, basically, and something that you want to do. And I fill my 5-minute journal up with stuff that I need to do for self-care every single day. You know what I do for these webinars? I do a lot of meditation and yoga and exercise in the morning before. I spend 10 minutes on hair and makeup and 2 hours on the rest of the stuff. That's the truth. What's the best form of therapy for HSPs to completely eliminate triggers or memories of childhood traumas, both small T and big T traumas? I already kind of explained that to you. EMDR, somatic trauma therapy, CBT. Are these traumas more ingrained and therefore more complicated to be totally relinquished by an HSP? No. I'm going to say no. I don't actually know the scientific answer to that. I was going to ask Elaine, but her grandson's visiting and she's busy. Maybe I'll get an answer, some research behind that for when I send out the recording. But the thing is that we experience traumas, I think, more acutely, and we experience more things as traumatic. However, we are more receptive to treatment and to all the 3Ms or any other thing that you do that you can do. I was just looking, Laura's not finding the 5-minute journal. I'll send you a picture of the book. And Laura, will you make sure I send them a picture of the book and the notes that go with the video, please? So you can, okay, trauma treatments. You know, we caution people about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because we're already such a thinker. We're such thinkers that when we start having to think about our treatments, you know, and really process them, we can get more trapped in it and more activated by some treatments. So you really do have to be discriminating about what works for you and what makes you feel more activated. But the good news is that when you find that thing, and I'm telling you, movement, meditation, all of these things, you will benefit from them more than the 80% in the dandelions. So I feel that we're more capable of healing of trauma, but we're more likely to have experienced trauma. Laura's throwing all kinds of resources there in the chat for you all. I think you can copy them. Okay. Hello from the UK. My question is, how to reverse the trend of poor parenting in your family of origin and parent better while still having to be or wanting to be part of the extended family? I'm going over you all again, sorry. I wanted to offer you the body scan. I just looked at my watch in the middle of reading this, but I hope you can hang out. I promise I will stop by 90 minutes. I'm gonna have to start over. How to reverse the trend of poor parenting in your family of origin and parent better while still having to be or wanting to be a part of the extended family. I don't seem to be able to forgive my elders for being so bad at parenting me. I've tried. Oh, can we just all enjoy this honesty like I am? As an HSP and parenting 2 highly sensitive children, sometimes I feel like I'm trying to reverse an oil tanker in the middle of the ocean in order to create the best environment for them. I feel I can't learn from the families around me or my original family, and so I feel alone. So, you know, I think part of what's going on here is you're such a deep processor as a highly sensitive parent that you're thinking, have you ever had paralyzing perfectionism? I think I have a YouTube video where I where I start the whole thing saying that, um, and or debilitating perfectionism, and it makes you feel paralyzed. And I think sometimes we can get like that when we're trying to reparent or trying to heal from trauma. We want to do every single thing right, and it's not absolutely critical that we do it right. I happen to Okay, I happen to be a believer that I know this person and I think she's doing a fantastic job. But you do feel so isolated sometimes when you're thinking so much more than everyone else. So um, I'm like the oil tanker in the middle of the ocean. You do kind of get going, right, in a certain direction, and you're going, you're going, you're going, you're going, and those things. Have you ever tried to dock a boat, even just a little regular motorboat? The momentum continues long after you stop pushing on the gas. In fact, you have to throw it into reverse in order to make it not slam into the shore or the dock. And that is kind of what this parenting process is like. Um, I think it's really important to have community. And I think I mentioned before, yes, in some of the highly sensitive person Facebook groups, if they're not well monitored, you can get pretty activated just being on them. I signed up for a bunch of them on Facebook just to see what was happening. And I just was like, wow, I can't be here. I do think that a group of us are administering the Elaine Aaron and High Sensitivity Facebook group, and we're trying to really keep an eye on it. We each do a week every 4 to 6 weeks. So it's not one person doing it all. And I think that's a good place to find community. I think it's also really important to communicate who you are and what you're trying to do with your friends, even the ones who aren't highly sensitive, and also to find other people who have sensitive children or are sensitive while parenting, because it's sort of like a DWI, it's a SWP. I don't know if you have that in European countries, but that means driving while intoxicated, parenting while sensitive. So uh, we work on the forgiveness, and we really, really, I think the best thing to do with regard to your community members and your extended family is to really look at who they are in the world and what are their temperaments, and accept that they are who they are. First become aware and then accept it. And then your action can be to create community with them in a more empowering way. I feel like I'm not doing this justice, but forgiving your elders is the absolute key, and forgiving yourself is the second one. I'm going to get to let me do real quick the TCK. Did you all see this Google Doc? I had to look it up, Karina. Good evening from Spain. So I have a great interest in knowing how being a third culture kid works for a highly sensitive child. Since we highly sensitive people are already different, and being a third culture kid means having to deal with being even more different, it could seem overwhelming or traumatic for us at first sight. I must say I found out about this TCK, third culture kid term, just a few months ago, but it's really got me to think about where my abilities and disabilities come from. As when you read about TCK, third culture kids, they seem to develop a great adaptive sensibility. Wouldn't an HSC be willing to stop traveling after all the stress and effort of traveling around in adulthood? I don't quite understand that. Or can a highly sensitive child just adapt and develop as well as any other third culture kid? Well balanced but rootless. Thank you so much for your answers. And from the UK, Lorna replied, in response to Karina, I chose to stop moving around and ended third culture kid thing for my children, as roots seemed most important to me and my family at that time, and so I could parent better. Still a work in progress. Here's the thing about sensitive children, in my opinion, and that is that we are so aware of the subtleties. You know, we're really good at speaking other languages, especially animals. Like, have you noticed a sensitive child just being so connected to animals in their lives, it's because we are so tuned in and we process things so deeply. So sensitive children in other cultures can do amazingly well. I didn't go to another country until college, but I just went in and I went all in. I moved to France, and I have a really great accent. I may not have great grammar, especially not anymore, but I paid attention. So sensitive children can do so well at adapting in a different culture, and at the same time, it can't that unsettling can almost be another challenge, because the moving and the I think the dual culture thing can be fantastic. They can be so good at it, is my opinion. No research on this at all. I'm just telling you my experience, or my thoughts on this. But I think that moving around, and I know that moving around is really challenging for sensitive children. It's another thing that can become a trauma if we don't process it really well. So I'm really sorry that I can't do a better job on that, but I'm going to be thinking a lot about it. So thank you for bringing it to my attention. And I know we have a few expatriate folks and other people in Europe, or and someone in Egypt who have moved around. So thank you so much for bringing that to my consciousness. It's so hard to express oneself, even in email. When one gets triggered from an old wound, it hurts so much to feel held back by yourself. Is there a tip for this? I think it's so important to give oneself a ton of time. Deep processing means that our transitions and our thinking are slower in general. In fact, even our developmental milestones are slower. You remember that I said this many times, but we have new folks. I want to say again that highly sensitive children, while they may seem so funny and articulate and brilliant on the one hand, and so much older than their years on the one hand, on the other hand, we are very much slower to develop because we process our developmental milestones deeply as well. So we might call highly sensitive children late bloomers. They may be precocious in some ways and yet much younger in other ways. So for the children, I want us to really not push them to develop more quickly, to hold them back, to baby them as much as possible. And dads often say to me, but I want her to be ready for high school or middle school. I'm worried that she'll be too sensitive or too young for these environments. And you know what? Public school environments in the States are probably not in general great places for sensitive children. I went to public schools, but I was singled out and put in special programs. I'll tell you an example. 7th grade, I got to be in the newspaper class. So look for those things for the children. So let yourselves be slow. And in terms of expressing oneself, here's what's so important. Write all emails to yourself. And write. It is such a good way to put your thoughts down and to process. I don't think there's a population for whom journaling is more important than highly sensitive people. And when you're reading a book, they teach this to kids who are college bound and in college, that you're supposed to annotate in the book. So I really recommend reading a book with a pen or a pencil and just writing all over it especially, books about sensitivity or about trauma. I like to put Post-its in my books and in my journal as well, and I annotate my journal. Such a nerd. And books I read on Post-its. And so allow yourself to take time. We say all the time, it's so important to practice everything. So I often send emails to folks. I send them to myself first, and then I push send, I copy them and paste them in a new email to send out afterwards. And I always find things I want to change, and sometimes I decide not to send them. You can also write your letters to yourselves and to your children, and anything you want to write with a pen. I find that really, really, really helpful. I don't have time, Sylvia, and I don't know about reversal parenting. So Would you shoot me an email about reversal parenting and I'll look into it? She asked, can reversal parenting be considered traumatic for a child? I don't know that term, and we're at the end of our time. So I'm just going to take a moment before I close this webinar and say that I was um, anxious about this topic because I know it can be so hard and so triggering. I think professional support is critical if you're dealing with trauma. This time while we're going through global trauma is not a time to work on your own personal trauma, except in as much as you need to just support yourself. I really want HSPs to not just survive, but to thrive. The good news about differential susceptibility is that everything you do, all the things I've mentioned today and people put in the chat, every book you read, every time you turn on, oh, I forgot my breathing and my links that I sent to you, Laura. I want you to go look at the Yoga with Adrienne 11-minute morning. I'll put the link in the notes because I know some people won't have the chat. It's not because the yoga is great, although you know Adrienne's my best YouTube friend. I don't know her. But in this 11-minute video, the 11-minute morning yoga, Adrienne is with her dog Benji. And I'd like you just to look at the video. You can watch the whole thing if you want. You know, it's 11 or 12 minutes, but you can just watch a few minutes of it. I want you to look at Benji, the dog. Because Adrienne is breathing, meditating, and doing yoga. Look what it's doing to Benji. Okay? Benji is sacked out. He is so relaxed. That's what you do for yourself, for your brain, when you do a lot of this kind of self-care. There's the link in the chat, everyone. And it's what you do for your children when you do a lot of breathing and self-care. And I'm going to leave the breathing exercises for the next time we meet. Maybe I'll do a little video on breathing and put it in the notes. You all you have to do is take care of you. It's not easy, and I'm sorry it isn't. Elaine has this lovely quote in the new author's note to the new recorded highly sensitive child. And she says, to have an exceptional child, you have to have an exceptional child. You, my highly sensitive friends, you are exceptional children. It requires exceptional parenting, exceptional self-care, exceptional structure, exceptional work on designing a life that's compatible for your exceptional selves. It's not easy. It's a gift. We were born with it. And it is a superpower. All those times in your life when you were overstimulated by traumatic events or just hard things, those things make it hard to be highly sensitive. You also have the gift of a very, very adaptable brain. Those mirror neurons that are part of our sensitivity, they make us take in everything we do for ourselves, everything we do to help ourselves, and make use of it. So your assignment for this next few weeks before I see you again on July 10th for boundaries, that's the next step, y'all, for boundaries on July 10th in the Are You Highly Sensitive webinar series. Your assignment between now and then is to really, really put your oxygen mask on first and do radical self-care. And I also want to invite everyone who's a member and all new members who join between now and July 10th to shoot us an email, areyouhighlysensitive@gmail.com, and request an old webinar that you missed. We're going to give everybody a free webinar. The value is priceless, like a MasterCard commercial, but generally it's $37 per webinar. So if you missed one in the past, we're going to shoot out a list in a newsletter of all the available webinars, and we're going to send you a link to one that you missed that you'd like to have access to. Thank you so much for being here, for being vulnerable, transparent, and for being you. Take care of you. I know you can do it, HSPs. Bye for now. Peace.